Welcome to the Money Mile Podcast. I am your host, Justin Waller, and I'm happy you are here. We like to think of Money Mile as standing at the corner of triathlon and personal finance. We believe that age group triathletes are the lifeblood of our sport, and we want to shine the light on some good people doing great things in our sport. Today, we are going to have our Questions on Course segment and a new guest to the show. Today, we are joined by Kirsten Miller. Kirsten is a triathlete and board-certified nutritionist specializing in sports nutrition. So stick around to hear more about her story after we discuss our Questions on Course, which is a great question from a relatively new member to the community. I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of folks. And with that, let's jump into the Questions on Course. This is a great question from a newer member of our community, and I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of folks here. Please keep in mind that these are for educational purposes only and not financial advice about your individual situation. So here's the question. My husband is fortunate to retire soon. I will continue to do what I do because it is not a job to me and I really like my work. I think it is important that we can continue to live our same lifestyle in retirement, afford new bikes, equipment, etc. Are there assumptions we can make in our retirement plan to make sure this happens? Great question. This is also a very complex problem, and we are talking about likely multiple decades of your lives. We need to make sure that the decisions in your retirement are not going to leave you with a fear of running out of money later in retirement. Because of this complexity, I strongly recommend you consult with a fee-only financial planner to get perspective on your situation without being sold financial products. But sometimes people can't afford that easily. I recognize that I am biased here, but I also think that you can't afford not to get the best advice from experts in the field. It is not required that you work with someone forever, but getting some guidance, especially early on, can be tremendous. I suggest that if you are within about 5 years of your retirement, you should consider collaborating with a financial planner. Okay, now that I've got the disclaimer information out of the way, let's get to it. As a starting point, I suggest making sure that you are familiar with the common challenges you are likely to face in retirement. We have a lot of resources in the archives of this podcast about retirement planning specifically, so I would suggest reviewing some of the past episodes here. The financial training plan would also be a good place to start, and that starts at episode 21 and extends through episode 25-ish or so. Without rehashing everything, I will try to give you a couple of the key things to consider. You should understand your vision of your future and what you want your ultimate finish line to look like. For example, if you are starting with $2 million of investments, do you want to grow that in your retirement? Do you want it to stay about the same, or do you want to spend your portfolio down and, as one client had affectionately referred to it as, bounce the check to the mortician on the way out? Depending upon your approach and your vision of your future, you'll want to approach your strategies differently. You should also understand your strengths and weaknesses in relation to your financial plan. Some common strengths are good health, longevity, which can be a dual-edged sword, also the future earning capacity that you have if for some reason you did need to re-engage professionally for work. Your ability to change course down the road, it can also be a significant strength. As an example, if you're targeting $10,000 per month and your plan allows for $10,100 per month, you don't have a lot of wiggle room there, but you can always change course. If you needed to cut back, could you? Could you go from $10,000 per month to $8,000 per month? Even for a little while, just to give yourself or your portfolio some breathing room if you needed to. I don't suggest starting a 30-year mortgage at retirement as it locks in a fixed expense, likely for the rest of your life. This is where I would ideally want you to be debt-free when you start your retirement journey, but it gives you a sense of how flexible is your financial situation. Can you adjust to that moving forward? Now, your individual risk tolerance and your situation may vary here, but I think these are some good starting points for strengths. Common weaknesses. The first of which as a weakness is a potentially high tax bill in the future. You can think about it if most of your resources are in tax-deferred accounts like 401ks and 403bs that are going to be fully taxable in retirement, you want to make sure that you have appropriately assessed or appropriately adjusted your targets for that tax bill in retirement. Along with this, can you access the money that you have without penalty? Now, if you've not reached a qualifying age, which is commonly age 59 and a half in the US, can you access enough of your resources without that penalty? The penalties can be steep if you're trying to get to your money early, and there are other ways around it if you are not 59 and a half, or you might have special accounts that allow you to get to it sooner, but it's something you want to be aware of. Second common weakness is a risk of long-term care. One half of retirees will need some healthcare resources of some sort within their lifetime. This means you need to have a long-term care strategy, not necessarily long-term care insurance. In my world, a paid-off home can be a great resource as a fallback strategy. If you did need long-term care or something of that nature, having significant home equity can be a potential significant resource to fall back on, and essentially consider yourself self-insured if you have enough home equity. If you are married, something I have recently started talking with clients about is considering the strength of their marital relationship. This has been a growing trend in recent years of more divorces of couples over 50. This is commonly referred to as a gray divorce or a silver divorce. If half of marriages end in divorce, that means that the other half end in death, which is a fun little aspect of statistics. But if half of marriages end in divorce, in my world, that means that investing in your relationship is important, and it can be a big piece to making sure that you're on the same page growing together into the future and not growing apart. This is especially important as the two of you have likely always had other things going on in your lives, work, raising children, whatever it might be. When the two of you are bopping around the house all day, staring at each other, it can get a bit awkward. So let's make sure you are retiring to a marriage you want to enjoy together. Taxes are one of the largest expenses over time, but a divorce and retirement could be devastating on multiple levels, not the least of which would be your financial situation. The next weakness is your fixed income ratio and inflation risk. What I mean by this is that if a lot of your financial resources are made up by a high fixed income, so pensions and Social Security, which is great, this could also have an unintended drawback. Most fixed income sources will not keep up with inflation over a multi-decade retirement. You need to have enough other resources to bridge the gap, and they need to be positioned appropriately. Now, it could be an investment portfolio, rental properties, or whatever, but it will likely be difficult for people to remain successfully retired with only fixed income sources. Along with this, it is possible that you might have too much of your resources in cash, so it's something to evaluate. It is common to see that as people get closer to retirement, they put all of their money or a significant portion of their money in conservative investments for stability. And if you knew you were only going to live 4 or 5 years, that's probably not a bad idea. But for most of the folks listening to this, that is probably unrealistic, and your excess cash or conservative investments are not going to keep up with inflation over time. The next potential weakness is, does your portfolio management strategy contain a transition plan? If you are going to rely on your portfolio for distributions within the next 5 years, you need to approach this correctly. Drawing down a portfolio incorrectly, especially in the first 5 years of retirement, can be devastating if it's not done correctly. These are some of the common risks that I would want you to be aware of. Other assumptions to be aware of or think of to make sure that everything's taken care of are a couple of general financial hygiene things, like make sure that your estate plan is squared away. What happens if you can't make a decision on your own behalf, if you got sick or injured, or what happens if you pass away? The next is to make sure that you review your risk management strategies so you're not wasting a lot of money on insurances that you don't need. If we step beyond some of the tactical pieces there, you should also give some consideration to the typical phases of retirement spending. Now, this isn't the same case for everyone, but it's common that early retirement we consider to be the go-go years where you're able to enjoy travel and do all the things you want to do. Over a period of time, most people will reach a point where they have slow-go years, where maybe it's a little bit more difficult for them to get around, but they still do that. They can't necessarily cram themselves into the back of the plane anymore, so if they're going to go travel, they're going to need to be buying first-class tickets and giving themselves a little bit more leeway because it takes them a little bit longer to get around, that sort of thing. So we call it slow-go years. And then at some point, all of us will reach a point where we have no-go years. You want to understand the differences of those phases, and you might want to understand that you could spend a little bit more early in your retirement while spending a little bit less later on. But in those later years, it's often the case that your medical expenses are higher. So typically, we don't necessarily see a significant decrease in expenses later on. It's that your expenses shift. So where you used to be traveling all over the place and having lots of fun, later on in your life, you might be spending a lot more on medical things. Another aspect of this to consider in your assumptions are your incomes aligned with the phases of your life? You might still have a mortgage in the early phase, typically those go-go years that I just mentioned. And if you still have a mortgage at that phase, you need to understand how those different pieces will interact. What is your Social Security strategy? There is a right time to take it, but unfortunately, you won't know for a couple of decades until after you've started. What is the best strategy for you, given where you are now? Please keep in mind that you can continue to reevaluate this as you go. It typically doesn't make much sense for you to delay Social Security beyond age 70, but you don't have to make a contractual obligation at 67 that you're going to wait until 70. You can continue to evaluate that and keep your options open. The next aspect that I thought of was, are you and your spouse really financially ready for retirement? Sometimes an employer will tell you that you can take a pension at a certain age or years of service, but it is not a testament to your financial ability to live your life well in retirement. Just because you have reached an age does not mean you have enough resources to live the life you want to live. Especially in a situation like this, where I'm sure the person asking the question really wants to be as comfortable as possible throughout their retirement, you need to make sure your financial situation is ready. This reminds me that I've told many people in my life that I thought they could do an iron distance triathlon. The implied comment here is that they could do it if they did the right training. I think that many people can do that if it's important for them. Just because someone tells you that you can does not mean that you can sign up for an Ironman tomorrow. You need to make sure that you've done the work and the training so that you can have a good experience on race day. Just because an employer tells you that you can stop working at that employer and take a pension is not a guarantee that you will be able to live the life that you are proud of. I hope all of that was valuable for you. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you here, but I hope that helps clarify some of the assumptions that you should be considering when you're thinking about your retirement plan, and in particular, if your husband is retiring early. And now let's turn our attention to Kirsten Miller. Kirsten has been doing triathlons for 22 years. Although it is a lifestyle for her, her family is her priority. So she plans her races around that. She credits that family first mentality to giving her longevity in the sport. She is also a board certified nutritionist and specializes in sports nutrition. She loves to help endurance athletes use nutrition to improve health and performance. So with that, Kirsten, welcome to Money Mile.
Thank you, Justin. I'm very excited to be here.
So if we are doing this correctly, our listeners are out there somewhere on their long, steady run. So we'll put links in the show notes so all of our listeners can catch up with you and connect with you after we're done with all of this. So is that okay with you?
That sounds great.
How did you get started with triathlons and get introduced to it 22 years ago?
Well, it's kind of funny because my dad was a runner growing up. And so I did cross country when I was in 5th grade, and I realized I hated it. I cried, and my dad kind of ran along with me to finish. And then I never ran again. But then when I graduated from college and I was traveling for work, and I realized, oh, running, you just need a pair of shoes, right? You don't have to find a gym. And so I started running. And then in 2000, I said I was going to do a marathon. So one of the first people I told was my father, and he laughed at me because he remembers that little girl. Then I said, well, I'm for sure doing a marathon. I did it and I enjoyed it. And then I moved to Boulder, and there was a lot of triathlon was kind of up and coming there. And one of my friends had done a triathlon, and she said, well, why don't you do it? And I was like, okay. So I bought a cheap road bike and went and did it. And I did the whole sprint the week before. And I was like, this is easy. And then I got on the race course, and the run was not easy. So then I joined Team in Training, which was super fun. And we did an Olympic distance. And then we would go get dinner after swimming. And somebody said, let's do Vineman half Ironman. And I was like, well, why not? So I did that. And then somebody said, let's do Ironman Florida. So then I did that. Like I did my marathon in 2000 and then I did my first Ironman in 2006.
Wonderful. I do remember back in the day, team and training was all over the place, getting people involved with the sport as well as helping raise money for a good cause. I haven't seen as much about them as of late. Do you know if they're still actively organizing training groups and whatnot?
I don't know. I do think they are still around, but I don't see the presence as much in the Denver community either. The fun thing about it is the guy that he's an older triathlete. He's in his 70s now. He started it. He was our coach. And then he started Rocky Mountain Tri Club because when we all finished team and training, we're like, what can we do now? But I hope team and training is still around because it's a great opportunity. Like I learned so much and you make connections, and that's what makes you enjoy the sport is having friends that do it.
Yeah, 100%. I know that some people do triathlon completely as a solo sport. In some respects, I kind of admire the dedication that takes, but one of the aspects that I love about this sport is the community that builds around at least the age group triathlete and us being able to collaborate together and learn together and work through things. I really love the triathlon community, so I'm with you on that.
I end up training a lot by myself because of family time, and I do like that as a time to sort of unplug, regroup, but it also is like the long bike rides. 6 hours is a long time. It's really nice if you can ride with somebody. And it's fun to do races and meet up with people. And even you start to get to know people that don't even live in your community and you become friends with them because you see them at the various races. So I think community is a big part of it.
Absolutely. We have found that success means different things to different people. So, Kirsten, at this point in your life, how are you defining success?
Well, I've always really defined it as being able to do a good job in my training, do a good job in my racing, but also make sure that I'm happy, my family is happy, I prioritize them. So if I have something going on, I'm not going to schedule a race then. I always ask them about my races before I plan them. And my son is 16 now, so he's just grown up knowing that this is what we do. And he's never felt slighted or anything. I mean, gosh, there was a lot of times where I did a really long training session. I would have to come home and throw the football around with him on the front yard. And I did not have the energy for it, but I did it because that's the important thing. And so that's really success, because if we're not happy doing it and we're not feeling balanced, and also, yes, we have to say no to some social things in the height of the Ironman training, but I try and make sure I can still do things with people and I don't let it run my life. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a lifestyle and I wouldn't be doing it for 22 years.
I would imagine that balanced lifestyle has actually had a big benefit for you long term in the longevity of the sport. We hear all the time of people doing a couple of big races and then burning out and just not doing it anymore. But having that balanced approach seems like it's worked really well for you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I truly don't think I'd still be doing it if I didn't have that.
Triathlon can be an expensive hobby. So a bit curious about what type of tips or suggestions you might have for other triathletes to make sure that they're getting the best bang for their buck.
Well, I think the first thing, if you're new, you don't want to go and invest in an expensive triathlon bike or something. Like you just don't know if this is something you're going to do long term. And I feel like there are a lot of great communities, and that's where team and training or a local triathlon club can be a great resource. Like I have some old wetsuits that I still have, and I like to lend them out to people so that if you want to do, like, Outdoor Divas is a great female triathlon here. Like, here, use my wetsuit for that and see if you like it. And then maybe you want to buy one or whatever. But I think there's a lot of great ways to get access to equipment that people will lend you, or at least you could buy used equipment. There's so many great used pieces of equipment. And I think that's where, like, checking into local tri clubs for resources for things like this, because there's a lot of people that want to get rid of stuff or at least lend it out, and everybody gets a good feeling out of that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I know the last wetsuit that I had, unfortunately, as I was exiting the water and trying to take it off, I had the full sleeve wetsuit and I'd had it so long. It was, I think, one of the original Zoots wetsuits. I went to pull off one side of it and ripped the sleeve right off the wetsuit. So I don't know that I can necessarily hand that one down to someone else. But by and large, I agree. I think most triathletes have a well-stocked armory, if you will, of different resources. And as you upgrade and get the new wetsuit, somebody else can still benefit from a lot of that other equipment. So building that community and giving other people opportunity to plug into that is fantastic. And I agree with you as well. I think the local triathlon clubs is a great way to connect with other people, just to have other folks to help mitigate the 6-hour bike ride, but also to have access to resources. Hey, maybe can I borrow your wheel set while I'm doing this race? Knowing that you're not doing it, you don't have to spend, $1,000 on a wheel set or rent one for the day or whatever. There are lots of things that we can do to help collaborate collaborate and mitigate those costs. I think you brought up some great points there. Kirsten, you completed the Boulder 70.3 earlier this year, finishing fifth in your age group for the third year in a row and improving your overall finish time from last year by 7 minutes. Did I get that right?
I think that's right. I don't know the specifics, but that sounds right. I know I've gradually increased it since 2021. I've gotten a little faster, not as much as I want to, but yeah.
Well, I don't know any triathlete that's as fast as they want to be, but it definitely shows that you're making progress with that. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience at the race this year and how it might have differed from previous years?
So this year, well, I had some injuries starting in 2017. They really started, and then I dealt with them. And then 2021, I was able to come back to the sport, and I did Boulder 70.3 as my first one back, longer distance again. And so my main goal was just to finish, and I didn't feel great on the run. I didn't have that consistency that I had in the run before I had these injuries. And so really over the last 3 years, I've been building back that durability and consistency in the run. And so my main goal actually for this year was to feel good on the run, not overbike the bike, because it used to be running was my strength and biking was very close to that. And then when I started to have all these injuries, the biking was definitely stronger than the running. And so sometimes I would have this approach where I'm just going to give it all on the bike and we'll see what I've got on the run and worry about it. And that was kind of my approach. And then this year I'm like, no, I think I can make some movement in my placement on the run. And so that was more of my approach this year.
You mentioned that you had a few injuries, and if I've got the timeline right there, the injuries started in 2017, and then you were back racing again in 2024. That sounds like a pretty meaningful amount of time, not at ideal training. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about the injuries that you experienced through that period and kind of how you tackled those things?
Sure. So, I was back training in 2021 racing, and then I didn't do full distance again until 2023. But so it started in 2017, and it took a year to figure out what it was. It was a tear in the plantar plate at the bottom of the foot, kind of where the toes are held together. And it was misdiagnosed by MRI and things like that. And then I found a great regenerative orthopedic doctor in Boulder, and he could see right away that it was this plantar plate tear. And he sent me to a surgeon to make sure, okay, is surgery an option? Surgery was not an option. It would make the foot, like the material, almost tough where I couldn't run well. And so I did the stem cells. I had a Boston slot. So I ran Boston 6 months after the stem cells, which is not ideal. And I was certainly not trained for it, but you don't give up your Boston slot, right? So, and then through that time, we realized both of my labrums were torn. One was symptomatic, the other one was asymptomatic. And my SI joint was super loose. I would go to chiropractors ever since 2006 because I had back pain on the bike, and they would adjust me. And like the minute I would get in my car, I would sit down and it would move again. So it was doing nothing. And it was just so loose that it almost had no recoil if you push on it. So I had stem cells on that. So I did that over the course of about 3 years on each of these spots. And then each time you do it, in order for the stem cells to properly do their work, you do need to take some time off, and you almost treat it like recovery from a surgery. So it would be these stops and starts where I just didn't have the strength, the speed. I didn't get that back in my running until I was like consistently healthy. And even I would say 2023 was a year where it turned the corner. And then this year was where I really saw it in the 270.3s I did in the summer, where I felt like, wow, I feel really good running again. This is fun. This is what I remember. I'm a happy racer on the run course. I love to cheer. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm back again. And so I still have more work to do, but it feels really good. And I had to invest the time to be able to do that. But in the end, I'm really glad I did.
Well, that's fantastic. And I've not heard of stem cell treatments utilized in the way that you have. That sounds like a fairly unique approach. You had to find a specialist involved in that. If I have the terms right, it's a regenerative orthopedist.
Yes. And so it's a board certified medical doctor. And the one I have, he was trained like through surgery rounds and things. So he knows how to approach it almost like a surgeon would, which is why he's very cautious about and careful about the return to sport, so that, and it's not a cheap procedure, but so that your body can get the benefits of it, because it can take 6 months for the stem cells to do their work.
Wow. Well, for folks who are out there dealing with particular challenges, certainly we're not providing medical advice here. I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea, but that's a treatment protocol that I had not heard of involved with like plantar fascia tears and, I'm sorry, was it the labrum?
Yeah, both of my labrums. And then, yeah, my SI joint was just super loose. And I have arthritis in my back. And I mean, I'm 57 and I've been pounding my body for this long. So it's, nothing is completely to be unexpected. But for me, I want longevity in this. I want to keep doing this. I love it. And so I need to take care of myself to be able to do that.
And it sounds like you found some creative solutions there. Curious, anything else stand out to you about that injury period, that 2017 to 21 period? Anything else pop up in there?
Well, I did some work, and I do a lot of work with athletes too on this. And I did some work in seeing okay, so I went through menopause. And so when the hormones drop off, that can affect the soft tissue. And so I had realized that I was having an issue with my soft tissues. And so we also did some work, and I found that I had some mold mycotoxins in my body, found that there was a big spot in our home that we had moved into in 2017 where there was mold inside the wall. I work from home, so I had the biggest exposure in my family. So we remediated that. And then everything started to get better. And I'm still working on clearing it out from my body. But I think the combination of those two things really contributed to getting these soft tissue injuries. And now taking care of that has certainly helped where I'm much healthier now.
Wonderful. Tell me again, how did you find out about the mold exposure? Like, what were the original indicators?
My hormones had tanked even almost more so than they should with menopause. I had my immune markers did not look great. And then I started to get all these injuries. And then it's actually a urine test that you can do, and you can see if you're excreting urinary mycotoxins from the molds, because the mold spores are a little bit bigger, and then they give off these tiny little mycotoxins. And so I found that I did have high levels of that. And then went to investigate, okay, where was the exposure? Where did it occur? And we found this spot in our house that had a lot of it.
So it was the soft tissue issues that then prompted at some point the urine tests.
Correct.
Okay, interesting. And I appreciate you sharing that. Again, not being a medical person, I would not have connected soft tissues with mold. Those two dots would not have connected in my mind. So I appreciate you sharing that. And that's one potential thing that somebody else out there might be dealing with. Maybe this might be a path for them to explore some other options and hopefully find a good resolution for them. But it sounds like you got everything. You did the remediation works. The house is now cleaned up and stable. And then did you have to undergo any other treatments to remove the mold toxins?
It's mainly just sauna, glutathione, things like it's ways that it releases it from your body. And then there's some supplements you take to bind it, and making sure you're excreting everything properly. And, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes some time. I even had an autoimmune marker that showed soft tissue issues. And so that went away right away when I started to take care of all this.
Oh, wow. Okay. It reminds me of like a Sherlock Holmes story where, hey, we know we've got a problem, but it's not the problem you think it is. And you have to dig in and find out a different type of solution to solve that problem. I'm really glad that you were able to work through that and find that. And thank you for sharing your story with our community. So thank you for doing that. It is time for a quick form check. Money Mile is powered by Waller Financial Coaching, a full-time fiduciary financial planning firm. If you want to improve your financial form and improve your financial independence, you can get a copy of Financial Independence for Triathletes by texting Money Mile, one word, to 33777. You will also be added to the Money for the Long Run newsletter. Again, text Money Mile, one word, to 33777. Now let's check in on that running form. If you have your own form cues, please use those. If not, here are mine. Drop your shoulder blades into your back pockets. Bring your eyes up to the horizon and lean forward from the ankles for the rest of this episode of Money Mile. About 6 weeks after your great race in Boulder, you also raced the main 70.3 and finished third in your age group, which is another fantastic finish. Congratulations there as well. What was your mindset like going into this race? And did you do anything different from your training from Boulder versus Maine?
Boulder I do every year because it's in my backyard, right? And so I kind of fumbled. I got into T2 in Boulder. You're supposed to rack your bikes every other for Ironman, right? Because they're really packed in there. And someone had racked their bike on my side. So the rule follower I am, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to move their bike and move mine. And then I'm trying to fumble with two bikes. And so I had like an extra 2 minutes in transition. And even though I was running faster than third and fourth, I didn't have enough real estate to catch them. And so I ended up in fifth, and I was just like, oh, I was so mad. And so I thought, okay, I need to find another race here. I'm getting third. Like, this is what I need to do. And then swimming is not my strength. So, this is so funny, but I've never done a river swim before. Why have I not done a river swim when I'm not a strong swimmer? So a friend of mine was doing Maine 70.3. I was like, okay, let's do it. That river swim is amazing. It's amazing. I started swimming and I'm like, oh, wow, the buoys don't usually come up this quickly for me. It wasn't even moving that fast, the river, when you looked at it, like with the kayaks floating in there. But that helped me where I came out, I think maybe 10th in my age group, which is pretty good for me in the swim. I make up a lot of headway on the bike. And so then that put me in a better position. I had a great bike and I ran really well. Coming down to sea level, it sure is nice from living here. And I mean, that I cannot say enough about that course. The first 9 miles are in the shade along a river. So even though it's warmer and more humid than it is here for me, it felt great. Then you've got some hills at mile 9, 10, but you've already invested so much. And like for me, I like to display my average speed on the run. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to see that change too much because I've worked already hard for 9 miles. So I felt really good. And I didn't have my husband out there to tell me where I was. So I didn't know when I crossed over and I got third, and I was very excited. I was like, mission accomplished. That's what I came to do.
Oh, that's great. So your husband wasn't there with you in Maine, but he was there in Boulder?
Yeah. And it's really nice to have with the Ironman tracker and with the seated starts. And I usually start farther back as a slower swimmer. It's really hard. You have no idea where you are on course. So it's really nice if you have somebody that understands how to read the tracker and all that, and they can tell you where you are. It's just that little carrot. And sometimes I'm like, I don't want to know. Don't tell me if I'm not as high as I might want to be, because that I might be like, yeah, this kind of hurts, so I'm not going to push.
The curse of information there. So sometimes it might, oh, you're right behind the next one versus, hey, you're losing a lot of time.
Yeah. Then it's like, okay, I'll just walk then.
Yeah. Your team needs to know where you're at and how you might interpret that feedback. I am typically one of those athletes that's just a mid-pack type of person and just happy if I'm pushing myself, and maybe I get a PR on the day, maybe I don't. I've never actually been on a podium in a 70.3 race. So I'm a little bit jealous that, oh, wow, you're racing for third and fourth. Like, that's a pretty awesome experience. Super cool. And again, congratulations on third place finish at the 70.3 main race. That is awesome. So we would like to hear a little bit more about the business side of things as well. As I understand it, the business name is Nourish to Flourish. Did I get that right?
That is correct.
Wonderful. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be and what you enjoy most about your work?
So I was a finance major initially, and I enjoyed that. But then I also really had an interest in nutrition, and I needed to go back to school more full time for that. And so once I had my son, I was working part time and I was able to do that. And I really felt like, and at that point, I guess I was 8 years maybe into triathlon. And I felt like, okay, there's a miss here because there's so much GI distress out on the course. Why is that? And so that's where I really chose to focus. I did my thesis on like how to minimize GI distress. And so that's where I really wanted to focus. And that's where my passion was, to help athletes. That's what I do now. I mainly focus on it. I do believe that we need to have customized sports nutrition for each person. I feel like it's very hard to say, okay, I'm going to go try to digest 90 grams of carbs because that's what the pros are doing. And I feel like, no, we need to figure out what's the right number for you, what's the right products for you, because the products might work. And then as women go through the menopausal transition, and so some products don't work as well anymore. Fructose can be more problematic. And so it's something that's really important. And I like to work with people individually to really help them figure that out.
I know that nutrition is not only on race day, but that's often when athletes will think about it, like, oh, I've got to make sure that I have the right intake based on what part of the race that I'm in. But nutrition is more than just race day, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's everything. It's what you eat before the race. It's what you eat before the long training. So that's where if somebody comes to me and they're like, oh, I have a race next week, can you give me a plan? I'm like, no, because we need to be practicing it. I want my athletes to know what they're eating the night before. We test it before the long bricks. What are they eating for breakfast? We test it before the long bricks. The exact products. I want them to do that every time, every long ride and long run. So that way they go into race day, they're super confident. They know this all works for them. They know that pre-dinner works and they don't have the stress. They have confidence and they don't have all the stress that comes the last minute trying to figure something out.
I know for myself, I have long followed the mantra of nothing new on race day, but nutritionally, I'm just kind of poking around in the dark and like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm good with a chicken burrito for dinner. Like, okay, or spaghetti, I can go with that. But really, it sounds like you're taking this to another level and testing athlete nutrition before those big races, before everything else, or before the big training days to make sure that when they get to that big race, they're going to be in a good position and they're going to be able to execute as best they can. And they're not going to have to deal with that very common challenge of GI distress, especially when, maybe they have a challenge with their nutrition, something gets dropped, they got to pick something up on course. That's a regular challenge, but at least having some experience, having some ideas, maybe what to look for, what to avoid, what works for them and what doesn't, being able to go through that in a very thoughtful process. As I'm kind of thinking through this, it seems like that would put the athlete in a much better position to make good decisions should things change. Even though we don't want to try something new on race day, they would also be in a better position to make good decisions. Do you think I'm taking that too far, or do you think I'm still on track with that?
No, I definitely think you're on track. And, we like to have a plan B. And I have some athletes that will come to me and they say, I don't want to carry anything. I only want to use on-course nutrition. And I'm like, great. But then let's get that on-course nutrition. You buy that and you're going to practice that in your training sessions. So that way, they know it and they're comfortable with it and they know it works with their body. If you have a plan, you're less likely to just like randomly do something because you're flummoxed. Like you're like, oh my gosh, in this moment, what do I do? And we talk about that. We talk about plan B. And that's where if they're traveling for the race, I'm like, okay, do you have an Airbnb where you can cook, or are you dining out? Let's find a restaurant. Let's look at the menu. Let's pick exactly what you're going to eat. You want to have all that dialed in so you don't have the mental fatigue going in. Even race week, you don't want to have mental fatigue. You want to be almost bored. And so that way you go into the race super fresh. You can make decisions on the fly if you need to, but hopefully things go well and you don't have to.
That sounds fantastic. We'll have to have more of a conversation when I get back into the race season next year.
Yeah.
We'll have to have a little bit more of a chat about that. Was there ever a turning point for you in regards to your training? And if so, what did that look like for you?
Well, I think as I've aged, right, I started at 35, which is still not super young, but it's, decently young. And then I had my son, and it's kind of funny because my husband comes from more of a sprint athlete background. He was an explosive sports. Now he's into mountain biking, but back then he said, never would I do that. But I remember I was breastfeeding. So I had to be efficient with my time. And I would be like, oh my gosh, I have to get back. And I'd have to run faster and push myself. I did a sprint. That was the easiest thing I could do. I didn't want to compromise my health or time with my baby. And I remember my husband saying, like, okay, it's a sprint. Like, you need to be ready to throw up when you cross the finish line. Like, you empty the tank. This isn't a long distance race where you take your time. I was like, okay. And I did it. And I got second in my age group. And I was like, wow, okay. I guess maybe there is something to that. And I think it also, I think mentally you kind of have to, you have to believe it a little bit, right? And so that made me start to see, maybe I don't have to be just a middle of the packer. Maybe I do have some potential. And it changed my training a little bit, where I thought a little bit more about how can I maximize my performance? How can I become a little bit faster? And I started to throw in a little bit of speed, where for me in the beginning, it was just about going out and finishing and taking my time with it and having fun, which I think is still important. But I realized I could actually push myself and maybe do a little better than I thought.
A lot of appreciation to your husband for giving you that nudge at that time. Yeah. Sounds like that has benefited you in a big way, just being able to build that gear. And yeah, I'm gonna lean into this a little bit more. All of that sounds great. Can you tell us a little bit about your A race for this year and what you're most looking forward to?
Well, this is an interesting story, and the timing of that is interesting because my A race was Ironman California. I wanted to get on the podium. Again, a river swim, thinking that would, help me. I was really excited. And then and I rarely get sick, but I think it had to be the flu because I tested COVID 3 times, didn't have it, but something where I had a fever of 101 and I'm normally like 97.5, and for 4 days before, and we did fly it. My husband was like, well, let's go because this could be just a really quick blip and you'd be really sad if you sat here on Sunday morning and you were healthy. And I also used my Oura ring and I could see my data was horrible. Usually it's really good going into race week. I prioritize sleep, all of that. And so we went, and then Saturday morning, the day before the race, my fever was 101 still. And I'm like, okay, we just have to go. And so I did wear a mask. I tried to keep everyone safe. So then I came home. I was pretty bummed out and I wasn't feeling great for a while. And so I decided to do Indian Wells 70.3 with some girlfriends. And just last night, I made the decision to do Ironman Cozumel next week. So we will see. I don't have the goal of the podium anymore because my training's obvious, but I was so dialed in for California. Like I did the webinars. I knew the course. I had everything dialed in. My training was better than it's been since 2017. Yeah. And so now we're trying a different approach. I'm just going to roll with it. I'm not heat acclimated, but who knows?
Oh, well, hey, for the listeners here, we are recording this in mid-November. So Ironman California was just a couple of weeks ago, if I recall.
October 27th. Yep, 2 weeks ago.
October 27th. So a few weeks back. So missed that opportunity. You had built up all of this fitness and you think, okay, well, I'll go try this half iron distance race that's still from here a couple of weeks away. But you decided to change even from that and say, no, I've got the long distance ready to go. I'm going to go throw down a full distance Ironman and hey, let's go do that next week.
Yeah. A friend was doing it. Yeah. And I was like, okay, so I had work meetings, so I couldn't extend it that much, but I extended my brick a little bit on Wednesday to test the fitness. And then I ran 15 miles on Thursday to test the run. And I was like, I felt pretty good. And I feel like my body's back now. It's recovered from whatever. So I'm like, okay, let's do it. And it's made me really excited because I've never had that happen where I did not start a race that I intended in the 22 years, which I'm very fortunate, I think, for that. It's hard mentally. It's hard. And we'll see what happens.
We certainly wish you the best of luck with this grand adventure in Cozumel. Have you raced that course before?
I have not. And I'm very excited. I actually said to my husband, I think I would be disappointed if the swim was canceled, which I've never said before, but it's supposed to be so beautiful. And I don't understand it, but there's a current assist. I don't think it's always there, but it's supposed to be even prettier than Kona. So I'm like, okay, let's enjoy it.
That sounds good. I have heard that there's some wind on the course, but hey, where isn't there wind really?
Right. California, I was prepared for wind, so we'll see.
Well, given the California experience the last few years, you got to be ready for wind, hail, I don't know, could have been a tornado with the weather patterns they've had. But it sounded like this year what really turned out weather-wise to be a great year for Ironman California. So I'm sorry that you weren't able to experience that, but I am super fired up for you to be able to go out and test yourself on the course in Cozumel. So I hope it goes well.
Thank you.
So just a couple of other quick questions. If you only had $100 to spend on triathlon gear, what would you buy?
Sadly, $100 doesn't go super far in triathlon, but I would invest it in nutrition, either a meeting with somebody to help you figure it out, or even if you want to do it on your own, but buying some of the different products say you want to use Encore Nutrition, it's Morton Gel, it's Mortal Hydration, buying some of those and testing them during your training so that you feel really comfortable, it works well with your body, and you feel really good going into race day. And so I think a lot of people overlook that. And there's, sodium, there's a lot of pieces that we do need to invest in for the various nutrition components. We've got carbs, sodium, fluids, doing that, not just, buying the gummy bears from Costco and throwing those down. I mean, granted, they can work, in some ways, but you need to make sure you're getting sodium and all that other stuff. And so I think investing in some products to find out what works for you would be a good use of $100.
That's wonderful. And from the nutritionist background, being able to say, hey, at some points, it takes a little bit of experimentation and figuring out exactly what works for you. And I understand, obviously, as a nutritionist, you have access to a lot more advanced tools to help people take the fast route and expedite those things. And hey, you might, based on you as an athlete, you might want to look at X, Y, and Z. But if someone doesn't have access to that, maybe taking that money and just trying some new stuff and seeing what happens on those long training rides. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. I mean, you can do sodium testing. I offer that. I do metabolic testing where we can see how many calories they burn from carbs and fat. And then we know how many carbs they need to replace and things like that. But I also do work with a lot of people remotely, and we can do some trial and error. Like I've learned over the years, okay, these are some, this is a range that somebody might want to try. And so then we test it. And then again, we test the different products. And you have to think about, how did you feel during? How did you feel after? How did you feel the next day? All of that stuff can give you insight to, is that a good product for me? Is that a good number for me, be it for sodium, fluid, and carbohydrates? So there's a lot you can learn by really paying attention to your own body.
Love to hear you say that. And also from the experiential standpoint, being able to help people expedite that experimentation process and do it in a thoughtful way rather than just trying something new, hoping for the best. And well, after the long break, I wasn't throwing up, so I guess it's okay. You might be able to do better than that by working with an expert in the field, working with a nutritionist that can help you through that process and figure it out better for you. But I also think that something that needs to be highlighted within this community is what you had shared earlier, is that in particular around female athletes, pre-menopause and post-menopause, their nutritional aspect can change. So they might need to look at different things based on where they're at in their life, not necessarily just what type of racing they're doing. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, when the estrogen goes down, we can be less sensitive to carbohydrates, and that'll affect the daily diet. And then sometimes when we go through the transition, we might become more sensitive to fructose. So a product you've been using for years that has a higher level of fructose in it might all of a sudden be causing you some GI distress. And a lot of people will think, well, this has always worked, so I'm not even going to consider that as the problem. But, we really need to be open to looking at, how our body has changed through that transition and looking at, okay, what are some of the levers I need to pull differently to get the best out of myself?
Kirsten, that's wonderful. And I hope the Money Mile community absorbs that. Sorry, I'm sure there's a better way to say that, but I hope that that's valuable and lands for them. Like if they find themselves in that situation to really take the time, consider involving a professional that can help them walk through that. Try things on your own if that's what you need to do, but also consider working with a professional that can help you expedite that process and get your body what it needs as you're doing all this training. We put our bodies through a whole lot. So getting some help and getting some support in that is a great way to go about it. Kirsten, in wrapping up today, and again, very much appreciate your time, is there anything else that you would like the world to know about you and your journey with triathlon?
I think the main thing is it's about joy. It's about having fun. And the other thing is there's all kinds, like there was a few years I did Xterra because I was like, I want to do something different. And that community is different. And I was fearful in a whole different way on the mountain bike, so I think it's about being patient with yourself. And if you find yourself getting burnt out, take some time off, look at maybe slightly different versions of the sport. Because in the end, we just want to be thankful to be able to move our body. And that's where, like with my injuries, I just feel so blessed to be able to do it. And I want to be able to continue to do it as long as I can.
Kirsten, thank you very much for sharing your perspective on that. In wrapping things up today, in future, if the community wants to follow up with you, we will be including in the show notes for the episode today, links to Nourish to Flourish, as well as the other resources that you had mentioned in here. But is there anything else that you would like for the community to know about you and what you have going on in the world today?
I do try and post information out there for females going through the perimenopause and menopause transition on the socials, and then just reaching out directly. I think a lot of what I offer to help athletes is very individualized.
Well, thank you again very much for your time. We wish you all the best in your race next week. We'll certainly be following along on the Ironman tracker and hoping everything goes according to plan, but hope you have a great race, be able to have the best experience that you can on a new and fun course and be able to put to use all of that fitness that you've built up. So we wish you all the best in that adventure.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate that.
Thanks again to Kirsten for coming on the show. I really appreciate you sharing about your successes and your challenges. I like to think that as age groupers, we are all in this together for the love of the sport. And while we might be competing within our age groups for podiums and spots at world championships, we can all win by sharing our experiences and getting better as a community. Thank you to Kirsten Miller for sharing your experiences and some very interesting life lessons in there as well. We will be including in the show notes links to Nourish to Flourish. In case you are Googling, that is Nourish, the number 2, Flourish. And we will also be including as many of the socials as we can find for Kirsten. I hope this episode was valuable for you and you enjoyed getting some insights from another high-performing age group triathlete. If it was, please share the podcast with your training buddies and friends. Keep in mind that if you work out, everything else will too, and we look forward to talking with you next time on Money Mile.